two championship contenders giving it everything.
No, Mikey. No, Mikey.
It's lights out.
No, Mikey.
And away we go.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Pitstop Pals. Dustin and Gage are back with you once again, and look, I will take the blame for us missing a couple of races. Busy getting everything set up at Edmonton Sports Talk. It basically consumed my entire life, so all of my fun little things, like the Pitstop Pals on the side that I love to do, I had to be like responsible for a bit and take care of some business. But Gager, if we were ever going to return, buddy, it's after a race like this, isn't it, man?
Oh, what a race. I was nervous from the moment the lights went out, Dusty, just because of qualifying, and was Red Bull even in it? And Max having to go to a completely different strategy if he was, in the front row or on pole, where you'd see him using at least a soft or a medium, but for him to go onto the hard tire and go right into the go long strategy. I'm just like, what's going to happen here? Is he going to be able to cut through the field? I think you said it today, Dusty, when I was listening to you. This is what I think I mentioned it last time talking to you. This is what F1 would be without Max right now. That's how it would be every single race. And to have four cars battling for the last 10 laps, and especially with Mercedes in a good window to, George could have taken the lead possibly. Unreal race, lots of excitement, didn't know what to do, so many other things that went on. I was glued in the morning of Sunday.
Imagine if that's what it was like every week, and either Max was in that group with the five or six of them, or he just didn't exist at all. That would be phenomenal stuff every single week. So they get Mercedes in, they double stack them, they get the tires on, the other teams don't come in. You're like, oh boy, this is going to be good. And then it was 2 seconds, 3 seconds a lap. They're catching up on these guys. Charles Leclerc might as well have not even been there. They whipped right by him. This is kind of comes back to my theory of put all if you qualify first, you start 20th. And everybody just works their way up through the field. That would be absolutely amazing. We'll get to Max in a second. But I think at one point, all four cars in the final, I don't know what it was, 3, 4, 5 laps were 1.7 seconds separating all four of them. They're basically bumper to bumper to bumper to bumper. And I have to give a lot of credit to Carlos Sainz for dragging Lando along enough that he could keep the DRS. And that basically stopped Mercedes from overtaking him. It was pretty clever teamwork by McLaren and Ferrari, wasn't it?
Well, it's just, let's call it what it is. It's old school McLaren teamwork, right? Yeah. But for Carlos to, and they said it on the broadcast, since the summer break, he's come back almost a different driver, the way he's driving that car. He's slow. I think over the past few races, you'd have to say that he is Ferrari's number one driver with what he's been able to do in qualifying and in race. And I love the fact, Dusty, that we saw racecraft from Carlos, knowing the situation, and then hearing Ferrari on the radio telling him what's happening, and Carlos having to explain, yeah, I know, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give him so that I don't have to battle with a guy who's got better tires right now. And just unreal. So happy to see, it's great to see dominance, but it was nice to see someone else on the podium, seeing the Carlos and Lando happy at the end, 2 new things. And look, I don't think we're too far away from this actually happening, Dusty. I mean, Red Bull's going to get it together, and Max is probably going to blow away the field in the next couple of races. But the gap is closing a lot, I think. And gosh, fingers crossed that this can happen again. Well, I guess we'll have to see what happens in Suzuka this weekend. But man, what a great, so many things like that. Liam Lawson, That's another thing I wanted
Holy
to
smokes.
touch on. This guy is a stud. Like, is Ricardo gonna come back or?
Well, I saw today they're still talking about having those two guys signed for 2024, right?
Yeah,
Sticking with Sonoda and Danny Rick. So,
yeah, they
but,
said
I mean, I
that.
feel like Lawson's got to have a seat somewhere.
The absolute best was Lawson in the in like signing autographs, and someone asking him, has Red Bull talked to you about knocking Max out of Q3? And he looks over and says, not yet. So I mean, what a job he's done. He's already outperformed De Vries in that seat, and to an extent he's outperformed Ricardo. He's got points, and not just because of a lot, obviously Red Bull falling, but he was able to perform in that car and gain them some well-needed points for AlphaTauri. Unbelievable by him. We'll see him in a seat soon.
Yeah, I think he's one of these guys, and I know this from cracking F1 packs because you get a lot of F2 cards in there, and you're always like,
Yeah.
I didn't want any F2 cards. But then you see these guys like him starting to pop up on the radar, and you're like, okay, I get it now. Like, those were basically rookie cards of these guys, essentially. So, yeah, he seems like somebody who's been on the radar for a little while and eventually snags a seat from somebody somewhere along the way. But he has to be ecstatic. What was that, his third Grand Prix? I think it was his third
Grand
race.
Prix.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
You could not have asked
just,
for a better. I mean, he's not going to finish any higher, really. That's pretty much peak positioning for him.
Yeah, unbelievable job. Great rookies, this year. I think what really is the racecraft of Oscar Piastri, like what he did, was amazing too. Like these McLaren drivers are unbelievable, and to think what Piastri was able to do this weekend and cut through the field and finish as high as he did in the points from where he was. That awful crash by Stroll stopped him. Like, imagine if Stroll doesn't crash, Oscar gets through to Q3. Who knows where he puts that car? And that's
at least in the
without
top 8, I would think.
At least,
sure.
And look, he doesn't even have the upgrades, right? Lando had all the upgrades this week, so I'm not sure if he's getting them in Japan. But man, the development of this McLaren, watch out, man. They are really close. And Mercedes looks like they have great racecraft. Like during the actual race, it's solid. Everywhere else, it seems to just fall apart. But man, that was
everywhere else. But when their tires get right, man, that machine can still scoot. And that, I mean, let's just dive to this because they make the decision to throw on the tires and then they're hunting, right? Like, it's just like, here they come. Like the whole time, Carlos Sainz is probably like, oh my God, it's going to happen again. Like, this is ridiculous. And then, Lewis was pushing up on Russell pretty hard the last couple of laps. He's like, hey, George, got to get going. And it did look like over the last few laps that Lewis had more car left than Russell had. But what do we make of the final lap of the race? George Russell out. That was hard. Like, I'm a Lewis guy. I like Lewis more than George. But I was just like, man, that's not how you want to see this happen. Like, I thought both of them were going to end up on the podium until Carlos and Lando kind of locked them out.
I loved George's radio. Like, let's go for the win. Like, he was in it and this race. But with the extensive view of the helmet cams, Dusty, when you watch the last lap and see Lando, he touches the wall, right? Just a little bit.
Twitter about this,
yeah. So, and when you watch it and you see and so George is kind of following, right? But he's on that line but hits it way more. And I'm not sure by Lando hitting it if it jutted out a little bit. I mean, these guys are like millimeters at that point from the wall, right?
Yeah,
so I think
from the wall, you thinking it could have bounced?
I really think that by what Lando touching the wall just threw George off enough that caused the crash. It when you watch George's helmet cam, it looks completely different from other laps while just following Lando. So I think that contributed to it. I also think that a huge contributor to him crashing was the pressure that Lewis was putting on him. It was getting close to Lewis maybe trying a lunge on the
Did you think
inside.
he was going to try to do something like because if he wasn't, he could have backed off a little bit, right? Like at that point, you didn't have to be right up on him as much as he was.
Not at that last lap, right? Yeah. He had it solidly. It was figured out. I think he put a little bit of extra pressure on George that also added to him him DNFing. And of course, I picked him on my fantasy teams, and I changed it all too. I had Carlos, I had Lando, and I had George, and then George puts it in the wall. And
Oh,
just like,
no
no,
way. That 1, 2, 3, buddy. That would have been huge.
Yeah, I had 1, 2, 3. So there's always next week.
Yeah, there is always next week. Just recapping the rest of the top 10 here in Singapore. So Carlos Sainz, Lando, Lewis, Charles Leclerc, Max Verstappen ends up finishing 5th, even though he had a huge load of poop in his pants all weekend. Pierre Gasly 6th, Piastri 7th, Checo was 8th. So Red Bull does get a couple into the points. Lawson, as we talked about, was 9th, and then Haas ends up getting into the points with Magnussen at 10th. Anything else jump off the page there for you, Gager? I thought Esteban Ocon was having a really nice race too until his car copped out on him.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. Again, one of my pool selections over the weekend. It's interesting to me that it seems like the planning and for all the other teams to get the strategy right. That's what I took. Tough for Yuki to go out in the first lap because he was doing so well. Yeah. But I just found that everyone was getting the decisions were proper. You really saw Red Bull make these. I mean, the strategy they picked should work. Thinking about, but then the safety car, that was the first time Red Bull falls victim to what happens in the race. Usually they just hit it every single time. So that was probably another thing that added to Max's frustration is that part of the race usually is what they take care of all the time. But yeah, that's just it worked for everyone else. Cool to see Max just cut through the field again. Like he is an aggressive driver. And I realize a lot of people just, they might battle him for a bit, but then realize that's not their race. But you saw a little bit of battle with K-Mag with Max, where K-Mag was getting the elbows out a little bit, not making it as easy as other drivers. The other thing
opportunity to race Max, right? Like
yeah,
that's yeah. You're very rarely in that spot, right?
You might as well, and if you can hold them off and do something, it probably boosts the confidence a little bit. Yeah, I'm fascinated with this whole Lawson thing right now, Dusty. They say he's going to be racing in Japan as well. Gosh, if he can put another solid thing, I wonder if we're going to see him in. Because I don't know. I just don't know. What was surprising too was that Alfa Romeo did decide to stay with Bottas and Zhou as well. That surprised me a little bit. They've been pretty disappointing all year. Not a lot of good stuff coming out of that car. Just we saw Zhou do a few races back, did quite well, but. Just I thought they would make a change in seats. I was surprised they're keeping with the same guys, but good for them. I guess they're kind of just waiting for Sauber and then eventually when Audi takes over.
So they're right now. This came out 5 days ago. So right before this last race, right before Singapore, there are 3 spots currently not spoken for next season. Both AlphaTauri spots that we already talked about. We think we know where they're going to. And then Alex Albon is with Williams until the end of 2024. That other seat right now is still a TBD, to be determined. Are you seeing a front runner in this? Like, do you stick with what you're doing right now, or do you mix it up?
Well, Logan Sargent's having a rough go,
Yeah,
right?
it is.
That's a couple crashes, not really perform when your partner or when your teammates with the same car and just doing incredible things in it. That's probably really, really disheartening for Logan Sargent. So I don't see him coming back at this point, does he? Especially with Williams and what Albon's able to do with it. Yeah, I mean, look, who knows? Maybe I don't know who's going to take that seat, but it's not going to be Logan Sargent.
Yeah, I would think they probably decide to switch some things up on that front as well. Nielson and Gager with you. Season 2, Episode 12 of the Pitstop Pals as we dive in and recap the Singapore Grand Prix. You know, you mentioned Lance Stroll there. I don't know. It must have been you who texted me. Was that you on the weekend that said, "Hey, Dad, yeah. Hey, Dad, I got into a little accident in the car."
Get mad, but I kind of crashed the car.
The closest I would have ever been to crashing the car, and not to the tune of 1.4 million or whatever it is. When I was in high school, I used to drive my sisters to school, right? So the three of us, and I would have been in grade 12, and we kind of lived at the top of this hill. So I had driven down the hill, and I was at the bottom of the hill, and I started to roll out, and then I stopped. One of my sisters said something, so I sort of stopped, and the lady behind me rear-ended me. And I was in a 1990 Ford Taurus, whatever. So she gets out. She's all freaking out about everything. Actually, no, she rolled out. I rear-ended her because I looked at my little sister. She had started to go, so I was like, well, I'll roll ahead. I looked down at Heidi, who's in the passenger seat. She stopped like halfway out into the – and boom, it wasn't even bad. There was like a little color blemish. So she starts losing her mind on me. She leaves. I circle back around and go back up to the house, and I go in, and my mom's feverishly vacuuming because that's all she would do all day. So she's vacuuming, and I come in the house. I'm like, hey, I got in an accident. I rear-ended this lady at the bottom of the hill, blah, 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 blah. And at first, she's getting mad at me right away, hey? But then this lady rolls into our house and comes walking up and is, like, yelling at me. And my mom's like, you should teach your son how to drive. And then my mom's like, you think I should teach my son how to drive? Well, why don't you do it? So it was just like this lady came up and took all the heat off me. I was working at Save-On at the time. I had to end up paying like $600 to fix her bumper or something. But that is a far cry from Stroll. Your dad is basically funding your entire life to be a part of the coolest thing on the planet, and you go and blow it. And it was amazing that they cut to it right as it happened. Like, it seemed like they cut to it live, and then they're like, all right, let's hop on board with Lance. And then, boom, into the wall. I don't know if it was like a pre-tape and they went to it, but it was great timing to get a look at that thing.
When you watch the crash, too, it's like, I can't believe he just got out of there. Like, a pretty violent crash.
A quarter of the car was gone when they showed that wide shot. Like,
unbelievable. But, I understand why he didn't race the next day, because he was probably felt just horrible after that, like physically and mentally. But man, are they ever going to do something about this, Dusty? I mean, the beginning of the year with with the Aston Martin, it looked, oh my gosh, this is the only car that's close to to Red Bull, and
the only legitimate threat for like 3 weeks.
And Lance looked like a threat as well. I was getting pumped because we all know we get a good Canadian driver. He's got a country behind him all of a sudden. But then it starts to fall apart. I mean, they did say that Fernando did, I think it was the suspension that was damaged, and that was reason why he kind of fell back last weekend. But when you look at the points, like Fernando's at 170. And Lance Stroll is at 47 points. And when you look at the constructors, I mean, that's a huge gap. And you've got Lawrence saying how Lance is going to be competing with Fernando. in the latter part of this year and beating his teammate, and we haven't seen any of that. I don't know. Hopefully Lance is okay, comes back strong and can finish. But if you don't see any like real performance, or I think he has to push Fernando at least a little bit, right, to warrant that seat. I don't know how they can move forward, especially they've built the new facility. They've got all this new stuff coming down the pipe. Everything I read about Aston Martin is next year, look out. So that's really interesting that I want to see. But I think they're going to have to, unfortunately, take the keys away from the kid.
How many points did you say he has? 46?
47 points to Fernando's.
If he had 100, if he had 60 more points, let's say, they are right there with Mercedes and Ferrari.
That's what they need. I mean, that's how they make the money, man. And he's got to pull his weight. Fernando's doing his thing. Jeez, he's unbelievable. But Stroll's he's not cutting it.
Let's play this game. If you could replace Stroll with somebody who's not currently under contract with Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, or McLaren, so the other 5 teams, who would you like to take from that group and put into that second Aston Martin?
Oh, I have watched a lot of Nico Hülkenberg, and I think both those Haas drivers are really good in inferior technology. But I think if you put Hülkenberg in something like that, I think you'd see a much better performance. He's a veteran. He's acquitted himself quite well this year. I think that's why they've signed them both back for next year. But I'd like to see. That's one driver I'd like to see in a better car, right? Because I mean, we've been saying this about Lando for how long, and now we see what Lando can do in a car that's developing to be better and better and better. He's at the top of the pack now.
We've already seen Gasly got that little look in the Red Bull before it became this Red Bull. Esteban Ocon, I think he could do some pretty serious, like he could definitely do better than Stroll if he was to get his hands on that Aston Martin. So right now, with the way the constructor standings look here after Singapore, Red Bull obviously full-blown runaway, Mercedes with 289 points, Ferrari with 265, and then Aston Martin at 217. So it does look like a 2-team race, barring some significant double points for Aston Martin somewhere along the way. But Mercedes right now with a 24-point cushion on Ferrari. Gager, how would you handicap this battle the rest of the way?
I think that this will. I think it's going to favor, with the tracks remaining. I think it suits Mercedes a little bit more.
Okay.
I think they're gonna hold them off and finish second in the constructors again. If I was Ferrari, I don't even think it's going to be close because McLaren's pushing. And I think when you group those, I think you can kind of group Mercedes, Ferrari. You'd have to put Aston Martin and McLaren in that group. And unfortunately, the beginning of the season just didn't. McLaren was at the back of the pack for so long. Other than that, they would have been right there as well. It would have been a very, very close race for second in the constructors. But if they keep bringing these upgrades and keep going, and Lando and Oscar can finish in the top 5 in these things, and is this the end of Red Bull?
As we know it,
have they lost it? I don't think so. But no, this is what I want to see. I loved that picture of 2 Mercedes, a McLaren, and a Ferrari coming down the final few corners on the last. It looked so cool.
Well, before we wrap, we do have to talk about Max. I liked seeing his interview after qualifying when I think they asked him, you think you'll be able to slide on up again? He goes, nope, not in this car. Nope, not in this car this week. I was just like, oh my God, here we go. But what happened to Red Bull, man? Where did it all go wrong for them this week? And were you surprised that Max was as bitter as he was with the weekend?
Yeah, because I think for Max, he says he doesn't care, but I think he wanted to just win every race and just embarrass the rest of the field, embarrass his teammate, embarrass everybody. You can hear it in his voice when things are going wrong. It gets a little bit higher pitched and a few more F-bombs. But look, it was nice to humanize him a little bit.
Yeah.
We've seen other teams just go into the weekend and not be able to figure everything out. And I think that was the most frustrating thing for Max. Look, they're so good at setting up the car and getting it. But there was a reason why I took Max off my team, Dusty, because as you know, watching Free Practice 1, there was a lot of complaints from Max and not getting it right. And usually when that happens, the transition from P1 to P2, it's night and day. All of a sudden, the Red Bull figures it out, and they're just cruising. And they didn't figure it out again. And I was like, this is a little bit different. And who knows? Maybe, that power unit, it's run its course. Maybe we'll see some new hardware going into the car, and maybe they turned it down for this race because they didn't feel it was competitive. So there's also a lot of other things that you have to think about. But I'll tell you after Free Practice 1 on Friday and see if Max makes it back onto my team.
Do you realize how exciting our off season would be? Like how excited we would be if like the final, let's just say the final 3 or 4 races is this mix of Red Bull and McLaren and Ferrari and Mercedes. That would just set up so nicely heading into next year, man.
I think we're going to see it, Dusty.
Eh?
Yeah. Well, if we look back when we in our infancy of F1 watching in the old cars, they couldn't follow each other, right? They'd have to back the tires heated up, and they just couldn't do it. You see how long, like that race, everyone was so tight for so long. Half of it was Carlos kind of keeping everyone behind and taking care of his tires a little bit, but the way that you can follow and how these cars can overtake, the gap is closing. Like, look at the times, the finish times. They're all within a second. I really think after next season of F1 do I say it's going to be exciting as Lewis and Max? I'm not sure, but I think it's going to be very close, where we're going to see a little bit more of a battle, not only between 2 teams, but I would say 3 or 4.
Well, I can't wait. I can't wait to season 3 of the Pitstop Pals. We still got a long way to go in season 2. Once again, to everybody who subscribes, my apologies for having a little bit of a hiatus. I'm sorry. I know that's not how it's supposed to work. I know usually like I'm churning out 3-4 pods a day, and but starting to get back into a regular routine here. So we shouldn't miss another race the rest of the way this year. And Gage, I have to say, buddy, this was real nice. This was I had so much pent up, Dusty, and it was a release. I'm gonna sleep like a baby tonight. We could have gone for 2 hours today.
Oh my
but
God.
Instead, I'm going to go have a cigarette because this was excellent. Gager, we'll talk to you next week, buddy.
All right, buddy. Take care.
The 2 championship contenders giving it everything.
No, Mikey. No, Mikey.
It's lights out.
No, Mikey.
And away we go.